Hello everyone, hope you are well. Wanted to continue on my legend series, and today I wanted to give one of the most colorful characters in cricket, someone who was famous for his physical appearance as well. I mean, as a player, obviously, but also for his physical appearance and his very distinctive mustache. I'm talking about David Boon of Australia. He was born 29th December 1916 in Tasmanian province of Australia, and he is definitely one of the best batsmen that Australia have produced, and he was a typically tough Australian batsman. And he was a major part of that 1987 World Cup winning team of Australia under Alan Border, and he scored 447 runs in that World Cup, and he averaged more than 55 as well, and he was a man of the match in the finals against England, where he scored 75 runs, and he had also scored 65 runs in the semi-final against Pakistan at Lahore as well. So he had a very good World Cup in 1987, and he was one of the major reasons why Australia won that World Cup. In all, he played 107 Test matches for Australia, and he scored 7,422 runs at an average of 43.65. And he scored 21 hundreds for Australia, and his highest was exactly 200 runs. And in one-day internationals, he played 181 one-day matches, sorry, and he scored 5,964 runs, and he scored 500s, and his highest was 122. And in first class cricket, he scored almost 23,500 runs, and he scored 6,800 hundreds as well. And first class cricket, he obviously played for Tasmania, and he also played for English County Durham. And David Boon made his first class debut for Tasmania when he was only 17 years old. I mean, that is a very young age to make a first class debut. And then later on, after 3 4 years, he made his Australian debut as well. And he struggled a bit here and there, and eventually he was once promoted to open the batting with the debutant Jeff Marsh, and it was against India in a test series, and it was in Adelaide, and he scored 100, David Boon, in that test match in Adelaide, and that was 100 in his debut position. I mean, when I said debut, I mean opening slot debut, he scored 100. And in the third test at Sydney as well, he scored another 100 as well, showing that he was definitely summoned to open the innings, and that was his spot. And David Boon, I mean, a lot of people will remember. I mean, David Boon. I mean, obviously, he had a very unique physical appearance. He was short, and he was like stocky, and he had a very unique, distinctive mustache. And he was like a cult figure. I mean, because of his colorful character and his unique appearance, he was like a cult figure, almost like a Murph Hughes as well. And I should say one thing: a lot of people will remember in the late 80s, early 90s. I mean, David Boon is one batsman. I mean, even though he was pretty stocky for a cricket player, I've never seen anyone run more force than David Boon. I mean, in those times, in the late 80s, early 90s, people will remember those grounds in Australia, those grounds were massive. And if you just beat the outfield, it wouldn't just go for four like these days. I mean, the ball used to go uphill, and it used to slow down near the boundary, and the batsman had to run the runs. And I've seen David Boon run 4 runs many times in my life. That's what I said. I've never seen any cricketer run 4 runs more than David Boon in my life. So that is a lot. And so it had nothing to do with figure where he was stocky, and you would probably expect him now to be a bit slow. But no, he was a very quick runner between the wickets, and very good judge of the single as well. And another thing, I mean, in that 1986 tour of India, in that famously tied test match in Chennai, David Boon scored 100 in that test match, that famous tied test match at Chennai. And later in that in that same series, in the one-day series, he scored his maiden one-day 100 when he scored 111 of 118 balls in Jaipur. And in that innings, his opening partner Jeff Marsh also scored 100, and that was the first time ever that it happened that the same two openers in a one-day match had scored 100. But Australia sadly went on to lose that match even after David Boon and Jeff Marsh scored hundreds as openers. And in 91, 92 also, I mean, against India, I mean, everyone will remember, I mean, David Boone was always a big problem for India. He always scored runs against India. India was his favorite opposition. And in that 91, 92 test series, I remember watching it as a youngster. 91, 92 in that test series, he scored 300s against India as well, and he scored 557 runs in that 556 runs in that test series at an average of 79.42. So he piled up the runs against India in that test series, and even that opening slot or debut, I said those 200s at Adelaide and Sydney came against India as well, and even that tight match century. So he had a real big liking for India and so scoring a lot of runs. And even in that 1993 series, Ashes series in England, I mean, he scored consecutive hundreds, three consecutive hundreds at Lords, Nottingham, and also at Leeds. So he scored three consecutive hundreds against England in that Ashes '93. So he was a prolific scorer when he scored runs. And after his retirement from cricket, he served as a national selector as well for Australia. And currently, he is actually a international cricket match referee. And I'm sure a lot of people have seen David Boon in the TV screen during matches as an international match referee. And there is a very and together with Jeff Marsh, Boone and Marsh was a very famous opening partnership. And David Boone did also open with Taylor in between, and but he also went down to sometimes batted at three because Taylor and Marsh also opened the batting in between. So David Boone sometimes batted number three as well. So he all his life he was either an opener or he actually batted number three, and he scored a lot of runs for Australia, obviously in excess of 7,000 runs, and played 100 test matches and 100 one-day internationals for Australia. Obviously, one of the great figures, legendary figures of Australian cricket. And there is a very funny story about David Boone. In 1989, they say when he was going on a flight, when he was flying from Sydney to London. They say this is what I've heard and I've read. David Boone once denied the story, but they say Dean Jones and Jeff Lawson has confirmed this. So I'm not obviously 100% sure. I wasn't there. I didn't see it, but what I've heard is just a funny story. That's why I'm sharing it. They say David Boone had 52 cans of beer on the flight from Sydney to London. That's what it says. I've read it. I've read about it long time before, and I've even heard what Ian Chappell had to say about it, which was a very funny thing. He said in those times that was regarded as nothing. I mean, during their days, Ian Chappell's, Dennis Lilly, Rodney Marshall's days. But that is what I've heard about David Boone. I wouldn't be surprised if it is true. David Boone definitely is capable of drinking 452 cans of beer. He said, and they say he said he was a bit anxious about the match or something, and that was what I mean on the plane from Sydney to London for the Ashes series. He had 52 cans of beer. So that is just one funny incident about David Boone. But David Boone was definitely one of the greats of Australian cricket, and was a typical Australian player, very tough batsman and mentally very tough. And he had big battles with a lot of bowlers around the world, even the West Indian fast bowlers. He has scored century once in Jamaica as well, and he was a very tough batsman to remove. And he was one of the major factors in that transition phase for Australia in the late 80s to the early 90s. I've said in my videos once, in the early 80s, Australia were in that top of the rank because they had a huge retirements from Dennis Lilly, Rodney Marsh, Ian Chappell, a lot of them. And they were in a big transition phase. But in the late 80s, it's through Alan Border, David Boone, Dean Jones, all of them, Jeff Marsh, all of them, that Australia, Greg McDermott, Merv Hughes, they all came by that 87, winning that 87 World Cup in the Reliance World Cup in India was a massive thing for Australia. And after that, Australia went from strength to strength. And then after Alan Border's captaincy, it went to Mark Taylor. And then they started becoming the best team in the world. And under Mark Taylor, they won that 95. They beat West Indies in West Indies, which was a impossible thing at that time. West Indies losing after many, many years. And that's eventually then Australia were unbeatable and started dominating cricket in the 90s and 2000s as well. So what I'm saying is that David Boone had a major role to play there. in the late 80s, and the transition. And obviously, like I said, being that big player in that 1987 World Cup, where he scored 447 runs and an average of more than 55, and scoring 65 in the semi-final against Pakistan at Lahore, and then 75 against England in the finals, and being the man of the match in the final of the World Cup. So that is my tribute to David Boon, one of the greatest characters in the game of cricket, and who was such a colorful character. And a lot of people had a lot of time for David Boon. He was someone that made cricket very colorful. He was almost like a mini Shane Warne in that. I mean, he was like a Shane Warne in that time. Obviously, Shane Warne came, and even Shane Warne and David Boon together played a lot of matches. Even Merv Hughes. So David Boon was one of those very unique, colorful characters of cricket, and definitely one of the legends of Australian cricket. Thank you everyone for joining. Take care. God bless you.